New Terra was a shining jewel in humanity's growing empire. The colony had everything: a thriving city, lush green fields, and a sky that shone with twin moons at night. It was supposed to be a safe place, far from war, far from danger. But safety was an illusion. On the night of the attack, Commander James Carter stood inside New Terra's control center, sipping his coffee as he watched the peaceful city lights through the massive glass windows. It was just another quiet shift. He had no idea that within minutes his world would burn. A loud alarm suddenly blared through the command center. Red lights flashed as officers rushed to their stations. The room, calm just seconds ago, turned into a scene of chaos. "Sir, we have incoming ships, unidentified, and moving fast," a young officer shouted. James put down his coffee, his heartbeat quickening. "How many?" The officer hesitated before answering. "At least 50. No, 100. Sir, they're warships." The word sent a chill down James's spine. New Terra was a peaceful colony, not a military base. They had no fleet, no defense systems powerful enough to stop an attack of this scale. The main screen flickered, showing the first clear image of the enemy ships. Dark, spiked vessels emerged from the void of space, moving like predators toward their prey. Their design was like nothing James had ever seen. Then came the message. The screen turned black, and a shadowy figure appeared, a monstrous alien with piercing red eyes and armor that gleamed under the dim lights of his warship. His voice was cold, emotionless. "Humans of New Terra, your time is over. Your world belongs to the Xorvian Empire now." James barely had time to react before the first blasts rained down from the sky. Massive fireballs erupted across the city as plasma bombs hit buildings. People screamed as the ground shook beneath them. Skyscrapers collapsed like sandcastles, their glowing lights flickering before turning to dust. "Get emergency signals to Earth now," James shouted, but deep inside, he already knew the truth. Earth was weeks away by standard space travel. Even if they sent a distress call, no help would arrive in time. New Terra was on its own. The security forces tried to fight back, but their weapons were useless against the Xorvian ships. Fighters launched into the sky, but the alien warships cut through them like paper, their laser cannons precise and merciless. Down in the streets, civilians ran in terror as Xorvian soldiers descended from the sky. 7 feet tall, covered in dark armor and wielding energy blades, the aliens tore through anything in their path. A little girl clutched her mother's hand as they ran toward the underground shelters. But before they could reach safety, a blast hit the ground beside them. The shockwave sent them flying, the mother screaming as she lost her grip on her daughter. James watched the horror unfold from the command center. He gritted his teeth, his hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just an invasion. This was a massacre. One of his officers turned to him, panic in his eyes. "Sir, we need to evacuate." James didn't move. His mind was racing. There was no way to stop the attack. But maybe, just maybe, they could send a warning to Earth before it was too late. He grabbed the communication headset and began recording a message. His voice was steady, but there was no hiding the desperation behind it. "This is Commander James Carter of New Terra. We are under attack. They came without warning. They are unlike anything we've ever faced. We won't make it. But you must. Prepare for war. Humanity must survive." As he sent the message, the building shook violently. A blast had hit the command center. Smoke filled the air, sparks flying from shattered screens. James turned to his officers, his voice firm. "Get to the escape pods. Save as many as you can." But he already knew he wasn't leaving. Through the cracked windows, he saw the Xorvian flagship descending. It hovered over the city like a dark god, its weapons glowing with deadly energy. The attack wasn't slowing down. New Terra was dying. James took a deep breath and looked at the photo on his desk, his wife and son, safe on Earth, smiling. At least they would live. As the Xorvian weapons fired their final shots, James closed his eyes, whispering one last word. Humanity, remember us. Then, everything turned to fire. The burning ruins of New Terra smoldered beneath a darkened sky. Smoke rose like ghosts from the shattered city, twisting through the air, carrying the cries of the dying. Fires raged where homes and buildings once stood, and the metallic scent of blood mixed with the acrid stench of destruction. In the silence that followed the last bombardment, the Xorvian soldiers moved through the wreckage with cold efficiency. Their massive armored bodies cast shadows over the corpses of those who had tried to resist. The invasion was complete. Aboard the Xorvian flagship, Supreme Commander Vectel stood in the command chamber, staring at the ruined world below. His piercing red eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Another human colony had fallen. Another step toward the complete eradication of their kind. A junior officer approached, bowing his head. Supreme Commander, the city has been secured. Resistance has been eliminated. Vectel barely acknowledged the report. His focus remained on the screens displaying live footage of his warriors patrolling the streets. Some humans had survived, cowering in the ruins, but they were no threat. The Empire would deal with them later. But something troubled him. He had crushed human colonies before, watching their weak governments collapse, their people beg for mercy. But this attack felt different. There was no panic transmission to Earth, no desperate pleas for help. There had only been a single simple message: prepare for war. Vectel's claws tightened around the metal railing as he replayed the message. It was not the words themselves that disturbed him. It was the tone. The man who sent it, Commander James Carter, had not sounded afraid. He had sounded like a soldier preparing for a fight. The Supreme Commander turned sharply. Did we intercept any human escape ships? Only a few, Supreme Commander. Mostly civilians. We destroyed them all. Vectel's eyes narrowed. What about military personnel? There were no significant military forces present. This was a colony, not a base. That was what made it so strange. New Terra had no fleet, no major defenses, and yet their leader had sent a message to Earth not in fear, but in mourning. Vectel's mandibles clicked in frustration. He did not believe in human courage. He had seen them break, seen them weep and surrender under the might of the Xorvian Empire. But something about this felt different. He turned to his second-in-command, a towering Xorvian named General Krall. The humans will retaliate. I want our fleet doubled at the next invasion site. Krall hesitated. Supreme Commander, the humans are scattered. Their empire is weak. They have never won a direct war against us. We do not need additional forces. Vectel's gaze darkened. You think like a warrior, Krall. But I have studied these creatures. They are stubborn, unpredictable. Krall gave a slow nod. Then what is your command? Vectel's claws drummed against the control panel. We move to the next target immediately, before Earth has time to prepare. A deep hum vibrated through the flagship as the Xorvian warships began to shift formation. Engines roared to life, and the fleet moved, their next destination already set. But they had made a mistake. Far from the smoldering ruins of New Terra, beyond the wreckage and the corpses, a single escape pod drifted through the darkness of space, nearly invisible against the vastness of the void. Inside, barely breathing, lay a wounded man, his uniform torn, blood trickling down his forehead. Commander James Carter's eyes flickered open. Pain shot through his body, but he forced himself to focus. His escape had been a miracle, but there was no time to think about that now. He reached for the small control panel inside the pod, fingers trembling as he activated the emergency signal. A blinking light confirmed the transmission had been sent. A distress call, a declaration of war. And deep in the heart of the human empire, the message arrived. Admiral Elias Graves stood motionless as he listened to the final words of James Carter. Around him, the command center was silent. Officers and soldiers, hardened veterans of past wars, watched the screen with grim faces. It had finally happened. The Exorvians had pushed too far. Graves exhaled slowly, his voice steady but filled with steel. They think they can destroy us and walk away. He turned to his officers. They think we are weak, that we will crumble. A pause. They are wrong. All across the Empire, the order was given. Warships were mobilized. Generals and strategists gathered, their minds set on vengeance. Factories burned with new purpose, weapons were forged, and soldiers sharpened their blades. The Exorvians had struck the first blow. Now, humanity would strike back. The fleet moved like silent predators through the darkness of space, their massive hulls reflecting the dim glow of distant stars. The Exorvian warships, confident and relentless, pressed forward, believing the war had already been won. They had crushed New Terra without resistance, leaving nothing but smoke and ruin in their wake. Now their eyes were set on the next target, a human colony even deeper in the outer territories. But the Exorvians had underestimated humanity. On the bridge of the HSS Valiant, one of the Empire's most advanced warships, Admiral Elias Graves stood with his arms crossed, watching the holographic battle map. His steel-gray eyes were locked onto the incoming enemy fleet, his expression unreadable. Around him, officers worked furiously, feeding real-time data into the system, coordinating the fleet's response. Sorvian fleet is holding formation, a lieutenant reported. They don't know we're here yet. Graves gave a slow nod. That would change soon. The destruction of New Terra had sent a message, and humanity had received it loud and clear. They would not wait for the enemy to come knocking on Earth's doorstep. They would take the fight to them. And they would strike first. A deep voice cut through the controlled chaos of the command deck. They still believe we're running. Commander James Carter, his wounds still fresh from New Terra's destruction, stood at Graves' side. His uniform was crisp, but the exhaustion in his face told the story of a man who had barely survived. He had seen what the Exorvians were capable of, seen his people slaughtered, his home burned. And now he was here, standing among the fleet that would make the aliens pay for every drop of human blood spilled. Graves smirked, a cold, dangerous expression. Let's teach them otherwise. Across the fleet, the silent command spread. Engines roared to life, weapons powered up, and defensive shields locked into place. The darkness of space seemed to tremble as hundreds of human warships came to life. The fleet had been waiting, hidden in the shadow of a nearby asteroid field, using its dense minerals to mask their signatures. It was an ambush. And the Exorvians never saw it coming. Fire. The first volley of human torpedoes screamed through the void, streaking toward the unsuspecting enemy fleet. Plasma cannons roared to life, sending massive energy pulses crashing into Exorvian hulls before their shields could fully activate. Explosions rippled across the enemy lines, ships breaking apart as fire and shrapnel burst outward in brilliant flashes of destruction. Panic. On the Exorvian flagship, Supreme Commander Vectel was thrown forward as a massive impact rocked the vessel. Alarms blared, and his warriors scrambled for their stations. Impossible. Vectel snarled. Where did they come from? General Krull rushed to his side, his 4 eyes wide with shock. The humans. They set a trap. Vectel's mandibles clicked in fury. These primitive creatures had never dared to strike first before. They had always been the prey, always reacting, always losing. But now they fought like predators. He slammed his fist onto the control panel. Return fire. Deploy fighters. Crush them. But it was too late. The human fleet had the upper hand, and they were using it ruthlessly. Smaller, faster strike ships weaved between the larger Exorvian vessels, unloading precision attacks that tore through exposed weak points. Battleships hammered at the enemy's defenses, sending more and more Exorvian warships to fiery deaths. Then the Valiant entered the fray. Its main cannon, a newly developed railgun capable of piercing even the thickest Exorvian armor, powered up with a deep, reverberating hum. The energy buildup was so intense that even space itself seemed to distort around it. Carter watched as the targeting systems locked onto the Exorvian flagship. He turned to Graves. "Do it." The order was given. A blinding beam of energy erupted from the Valiant, cutting through the darkness like a sword of vengeance. It struck the Exorvian flagship with devastating force, tearing through its shields as if they were paper. The hull ruptured, explosions ripping through its structure. Vectil barely had time to react before the blast consumed the bridge. The mighty Exorvian flagship, the pride of their empire, was gone. Silence followed. Then the remaining Exorvian ships broke formation. Some turned to flee. Others, leaderless and terrified, hesitated, their weapons falling silent. For the first time in history, the Exorvians were running. Graves exhaled, watching the wreckage drift through the void. "That's for New Terra." Carter clenched his fists. This was just the beginning. Humanity had been underestimated for too long. Now, the real war had begun. The battlefield was silent now, but the war had only just begun. In the aftermath of the ambush, wreckage drifted through the void. Twisted metal, shattered hulls, and the remains of Exorvian warships scattered like broken bones. Fires still flickered within some of the derelict vessels, their atmospheres venting into space in eerie, glowing trails. On the bridge of the HSS Valiant, Admiral Elias Graves watched the destruction unfold on the holoscreen, his expression unreadable. He had seen battle before, too many times, but this was different. This wasn't just a skirmish. This wasn't humanity defending itself. This was vengeance. And yet, vengeance was never enough. Commander James Carter stood beside him, his jaw clenched tight. His uniform, though pristine, bore the weight of his past. He had been there when New Terra fell. He had watched families torn apart, entire cities turned to ash. The screams of the dying still echoed in his mind. "They ran," Carter muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. "They actually ran." Graves exhaled slowly. They didn't expect resistance. "Good." Carter's hands curled into fists. "Let them know what it feels like." But even as the last Exorvian warships disappeared into the darkness, something gnawed at Graves' instincts. It had been too easy. The Exorvians were brutal, relentless. They conquered without hesitation, wiped out entire civilizations without a second thought. And yet, they had fled. That meant one thing. "They'll be back," Graves said. Carter turned to him. "Let them come. We're ready." Graves wasn't so sure. The Valiant and the rest of the fleet had won this battle, but a battle wasn't the war. The Exorvians wouldn't take this defeat lightly. If anything, they would see it as an insult, a challenge that demanded retribution. And humanity had just painted a target on its back. The holoscreen flickered, displaying an incoming transmission. "Sir," a communications officer called, "we're receiving an encrypted message from High Command." Graves nodded. "Patch it through." The screen shifted, and the face of Grand Admiral Thorne appeared. The old man's features were hard as stone, deep lines cutting across his face like the scars of countless wars. His piercing blue eyes held no warmth, only the weight of responsibility. "Admiral Graves," Thorne said, his voice sharp and direct. "Congratulations on your victory. The Senate is pleased." Graves could hear the hesitation in his tone. The politicians might be pleased, but the military knew better. But Thorne continued, "We don't have time to celebrate." Graves straightened. "What's happened?" Thorne's expression darkened. "Our recon teams intercepted a Exorvian transmission. Their fleet wasn't just attacking New Terra for resources or territory. It was part of something bigger. They'd been gathering intelligence on our defenses, on our fleet movements." Carter frowned. "Why? They already had the advantage." Thorne's next words sent a chill through the room. "They weren't planning to fight a war, Commander." He exhaled sharply. They were planning an extermination. A cold silence settled over the bridge. The Exorvians hadn't just been expanding their empire. They had been studying humanity, probing for weaknesses, learning how to wipe them out completely. New Terra wasn't an invasion. It was a test. A first strike in what was meant to be the complete eradication of the human race. And now that humanity had fought back, the Exorvians wouldn't just retaliate. They would unleash their full force. Graves turned to the tactical display, his mind already working through the possibilities. If the Exorvians were planning to exterminate humanity, that meant Earth itself was in danger. The homeworld, the last stronghold, the heart of the Empire. If Earth fell, humanity fell. Graves looked back at Thorn. How long do we have? Thorn's expression was grim. A week, maybe less. Carter cursed under his breath. That's not enough time. No, Graves agreed. It isn't. But it would have to be. Thorn leaned forward. Listen to me, both of you. The Senate is still debating a full-scale mobilization, but we can't afford to wait for them to make up their minds. I need you to take the fleet to Outpost K-17. There's a hidden military installation there, Project Revenant. Graves frowned. Revenant. That project was classified. It still is, Thorn said. But desperate times call for desperate measures. It's humanity's best chance of survival. Carter crossed his arms. And if the Senate says no? Thorn's voice was like steel. Then we do it anyway. The transmission cut out. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then, Graves turned to his crew. Set course for Outpost K-17. The order was given. The fleet moved, and humanity prepared for war. The fleet surged through the void, a wall of steel and fire slicing across the vast emptiness of space. Hundreds of warships, from sleek destroyers to the towering behemoths of humanity's dreadnought class, moved in perfect formation toward their destination. Outpost K-17. Admiral Elias Graves stood on the bridge of the HSS Valiant, staring at the tactical display. It showed the fleet's position, each vessel represented by a glowing blue dot. A course had been charted, engines were at full burn, but an uneasy tension hung in the air. Everyone aboard knew what was coming. They had won the battle at New Terra, but in doing so, they had awakened a beast. The Exorvians were coming. Commander James Carter stood beside him, arms folded, his face locked in a grim expression. Sir, we should be arriving at Outpost K-17 within the hour. Graves gave a slow nod. Good. Have all fleet captains prepare for immediate briefing once we arrive. I want readiness reports from every division. Carter hesitated. Do you think we'll have time? Graves exhaled sharply, his gaze never leaving the holographic battlefield in front of him. No, but we'll make time. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. Humanity was no longer fighting to reclaim a lost colony. This was bigger. The Exorvians weren't just planning a war. They were planning extinction. If they had their way, Earth would burn, and the remnants of humanity would be nothing more than ghosts in the void. But Graves refused to let that happen. A beep from the console broke the silence. Admiral, the communications officer called out, we're receiving a transmission from Outpost K-17. Put it through. The holoscreen flickered, revealing a dimly lit command center. A woman in a black uniform stood at the forefront, her face partially illuminated by the flickering displays around her. Short, dark hair framed sharp features, and her piercing eyes carried the weight of a soldier who had seen far too much. This is Director Evelyn Rain, commander of Outpost K-17, she said, her voice cool and steady. Admiral Graves, you're arriving sooner than expected. No choice, Graves replied. Time isn't on our side. Rain folded her arms. So I've heard. I assume Grand Admiral Thorn has briefed you. He told me about Project Revenant. A flicker of something passed over Rain's face. Then you know what's at stake. I know enough, Graves said. But what I don't know is whether this project is actually ready for deployment. Rain exhaled. Meet me in the briefing room when you arrive. You'll see for yourself. The transmission cut out. Graves exchanged a glance with Carter. What do you think? Carter frowned. I think she's hiding something. Graves agreed. But right now, they had no choice but to press forward. The fleet arrived at Outpost K-17, a massive station hidden in the orbit of a dead world. Unlike the grand shipyards of Mars or the sprawling cities of Earth's colonies, K-17 was a fortress, built for war, designed to be unseen. As the Valiant docked, Graves, Carter, and a select team of officers made their way to the command center. Security was tight, armed guards lining the corridors, their weapons held at the ready. This was no ordinary installation. Something was being kept here, something that could decide the fate of humanity. Rain was waiting for them in the briefing room, standing beside a large display screen. As the doors shut behind them, she tapped a control panel, and the screen lit up with classified data. This, she said, is Project Revenant. The image shifted, revealing a warship unlike any other. Its design was sleek, deadly, an angular predator wrapped in black metal. But it wasn't just a ship. As the schematic rotated, Graves realized what he was looking at. It's a hybrid, Carter whispered. Rain nodded. More than that. It's the first of its kind. Human and horrifying technology combined. A hush fell over the room. The idea was unthinkable. Humanity had been at war with the Exorvians for years. Their technology was vastly different, incompatible with human engineering. And yet, here it was, a war machine forged from the knowledge of both species. Graves narrowed his eyes. How? Rain hesitated, then changed the display. A new image appeared, this one showing something that sent a chill through the room. A Exorvian. Not a corpse, not a prisoner. A defector. This is Varric Tal, Rain said, former High Warlord of the Exorvian Empire. He surrendered to us 3 years ago. Carter's fists clenched. You've been working with one of them. We didn't have a choice, Rain shot back. Varric Tal isn't just any Exorvian. He saw what his empire was planning. He knows what's coming. He helped us build this. She gestured toward the schematics. The Revenant-class warship is faster, stronger, and more advanced than anything the Exorvians have. If we deploy it, we can turn the tide of this war before it even starts. Graves stared at the screen, at the monstrous warship that could either be their salvation or their doom. And if we don't? He asked. Rain's expression darkened. Then humanity dies. Silence. Graves turned to Carter. Thoughts. Carter exhaled. We don't trust the Exorvians. We never have. But if this ship can give us an edge. Graves nodded. He didn't like it. He didn't trust it. But he also knew the truth. Desperate times called for desperate measures. He turned back to Rain. How soon can the Revenant be battle-ready? Rain's eyes burned with determination. It already is. Graves straightened. Then let's take the fight to them. The HSS Revenant hung in the void like a phantom, its dark hull barely reflecting the distant light of the nearest star. Every system hummed with power, its fusion core pulsing with the combined might of human and Exorvian engineering. It was unlike anything humanity had ever created. A warship designed not just to fight, but to win. Admiral Elias Graves stood on the bridge, staring at the tactical display. The Exorvian fleet was on the move. Their warships, jagged and insect-like, formed a massive wave of destruction, sweeping toward Earth's outer colonies. This was it, humanity's final stand. Commander James Carter approached, his face grim. Sir, our fleet is ready, but the Exorvians outnumber us 3-1. Graves nodded. Numbers aren't everything. He turned to Director Evelyn Rain, who stood near the weapons console. Are we certain the Revenant's systems are stable? Rain exhaled. As stable as they can be. It's untested in real combat. Graves clenched his jaw. There was no more time for tests. A voice crackled through the comms. "Admiral, we have an incoming transmission from the Xorvian flagship." Silence fell over the bridge. Graves exchanged a glance with Carter before nodding. "Put it through." The holoscreen flickered, and a monstrous figure appeared. Tall, covered in black exoskeletal armor, with glowing yellow eyes that burned with malice. Supreme Warlord Selfar. The Xorvian warlord's mandibles clicked as he spoke, his deep, guttural voice laced with contempt. "Admiral Graves, your resistance is meaningless. Your species has defied the natural order for too long. Surrender, and I will make your extinction swift." Graves folded his arms. "Not today." Zelfar let out a low, rumbling laugh. "Arrogant to the end." His expression darkened. "Then die with your people." The transmission cut off. An alarm blared. "Admiral," one of the officers shouted. "Enemy fleet is accelerating. They're charging weapons." Graves turned to Rain. "Is the Revenant's experimental drive online?" Rain hesitated. "Yes, but we've never tested it under these conditions. If it fails, we die." Graves turned back to the bridge crew. "All ships, prepare for combat. Engage the Revenant's stealth mode and get us into position." The HSS Revenant vanished from sight as its advanced cloaking field activated. Outside, the Xorvian fleet loomed closer, their massive warships glowing with lethal energy. The battle was about to begin. Graves narrowed his eyes. Let them come. This time, humanity would strike first. The battlefield was chaos. Explosions rippled through the void as human warships clashed with the Xorvian fleet. Plasma cannons fired in rapid succession, bright beams of energy streaking across space, tearing into armored hulls. Fighters zipped between the larger vessels, engaging in high-speed dogfights, while debris from shattered ships drifted like silent ghosts in the vacuum. Admiral Elias Graves gripped the edge of his command console, his knuckles white. The HSS Revenant remained cloaked, invisible to enemy sensors, lurking in the shadows of the battle. They had one chance, one perfect moment to strike. "Status on the Xorvian flagship," he barked. Commander James Carter checked his display. Still at the center of their formation, heavily shielded. "Their fleet is protecting it like a fortress." Graves nodded. As expected. Supreme Warlord Selfar knew that if his ship fell, the Xorvian forces would crumble. He was arrogant, but not careless. "We need to get in close," Graves said. "Rain, prepare the experimental warp drive." Director Evelyn Rain hesitated. "We don't even know if it'll hold." "The last simulation." "We're past simulations," Graves interrupted. "Either it works or we lose this war." Rain exhaled sharply but gave a quick nod. "Activating now." The HSS Revenant trembled as the warp drive spooled up. A deep, resonant hum filled the bridge. The ship's systems flickered for a moment, and then they were gone. In the blink of an eye, the Revenant reappeared behind the Xorvian flagship, slipping through space undetected. The enemy had no idea they were there. Graves wasted no time. "All weapons, fire now." The Revenant unleashed hell. A full barrage of plasma torpedoes, railgun slugs, and particle beams slammed into the Xorvian flagship's shields. The sheer force of the attack sent ripples through its protective barrier, causing it to flicker. Warning lights flared across enemy systems as the ship struggled to withstand the onslaught. "Direct hit," Carter shouted. "Their shields are failing." On the holoscreen, Supreme Warlord Selfar appeared again. His expression was no longer one of arrogance. It was rage. "You dare." Graves cut the transmission. "Charge the rail cannon," he ordered. "We end this now." Deep within the Revenant, massive capacitors powered up, feeding energy into a weapon designed for one purpose: destruction. The Xorvian flagship, now fully aware of the danger, turned all its weapons toward the Revenant. Beams of plasma and torpedoes streaked toward them. "Evasive maneuvers," Carter shouted. The ship rocked violently as it dodged incoming fire, but they couldn't evade forever. Rail cannon at 90% charge. Rain called out. "We need more time." Graves growled. "Sir, enemy reinforcements inbound." A second Saurian battleship was approaching fast. They were running out of time. Graves made his decision. Fire, now. The HSS Revenant unleashed its rail cannon. A single massive slug, moving at nearly the speed of light, tore through space and collided with the Saurian flagship. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, a blinding explosion erupted from the warlord's ship. The impact shattered its hull, ripping it apart in a chain reaction of detonations. Shockwaves tore through the Saurian fleet, throwing ships off course, damaging their formations. Silence filled the bridge. Then, cheers erupted. "Enemy flagship is gone," Carter reported. "Their fleet is breaking apart. They're retreating." Graves exhaled, his body finally relaxing. It was over. Humanity had won.